The BYU Cougars have a shot to get back into the college football playoff mix. What do they got to do to make it? We're going to talk about that next on this crossover.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
This crossover of Locked On Cougars and Locked On the Portal. I am your host, Brian Smith, along with Jake Hatch, longtime BYU guy. Thank you very much for checking out both our channels. We truly appreciate you making us each your first stop every single day. We appreciate everything that you do to come in here. Thank you. Please like and subscribe. Today, Jake and I are going to be discussing all things Big 12. I have some tough questions. I'm going to put Jake on the spot on the Big 12 side of things a little later in the show, talking trenches beyond BYU, Texas Tech. How many teams are really viable at the Big 12 level? We're going to talk about the portal for BYU. Some interesting pickups, including a linebacker that Jake is extremely high on for the Cougars. What is the biggest position concern for the Cougars? And just 2026, what I want to start with, I think they have a great chance to make the playoff. I know Jake does too. So let's start with that, Mr. Hatch. What has to happen for BYU to impress the committee and just college football fans in general to take that next step, you think, this next season?
Actually, and start inside the top 25 polls at the start of the season. I hate to say that's but it's kind of it's been that situation the last 2 years. They've compiled a 23-4 record, Brian, and both the 2024 and 2025 seasons, they started on the outside of the top 25 looking in. Now, they fought their way inside the top 25 and have been right on that doorstep of the college football playoff the past 2 years. But based on what people like On3, they did a composite way too early top 25 poll. BYU projects to be a top 15 team. And if they win at the level I think they can win at this season, if they start inside that top 15, I got a strong feeling that based on how the schedule lays out, they very well could find themselves at least an at-large team in the playoff field.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the fair estimate. I've looked over their schedule. It's not like it's murderer's row. It's pretty standard Big 12 schedule. They do have Notre Dame out of conference. We'll talk a little bit about that. But I actually think that's good. Even if they lost close, it's another quality point. And if you win, obviously, it helps you catapult into the playoffs. Either way, it's a win for that program. But Bear Bachmeier comes back. Mm-hmm. You and I were talking before the show. The offensive line has majority of its guys back, and they added players.
Yeah.
Now tell me about outside. And this is where I'm gonna crucify you if I don't hear something I need to hear here. Outside the numbers is where I'm concerned. Offense, defense, it's a different story. But do they have the guys to go get it against elite teams that can play man defense?
That's a valid question. I think they actually answered that question this past year because there's always been that question about BYU's wide receivers and also tight ends. Parker Kingston, JoJo Phillips, those are kind of your top two guys at wide receiver this year. And I think both of them at points last year showed that if you man them up, they're very capable with their route running and more importantly, something the BYU's not traditionally had. They have legit track speed. They've been able to get open against man defense. Now you do lose Chase Roberts. Chase was a man beater in and of itself, but they also added some young talent, Reggie Frischneck, Tei Nakua, I think a kid named Jaron Pula, as well as Legend Glasker, two incoming freshmen who are already enrolled. They're both standouts at the high school level here in Utah. I know the coaches are extremely high on their chances of contributing early. So I do think that they have talent at wide receiver that can go up against man defenses because they've proven they can beat it before.
I think the freshman, Apua, whatever, his film was really good. I'm like, that kid doesn't normally come out of Utah. You know, you got to make sure you keep that kid home. He's got some size to him. He could have played for any program in the country. I bet you he ends up in the starting lineup before the end of the year. I think he's going to be a special player. What is your biggest concern on the other side of the ball, if there is one? And we're talking, whether it's D-line, linebacker, secondary.
I think the biggest thing is the D-line in terms of its ability to be as impactful as it needs to be. BYU looked across the field last year when they went against Texas Tech in both the regular season and in the Big 12 title game and saw maybe the best defensive line that they've seen in quite literally years. I can tell you there's one BYU coach who told me it's the best defensive line he's seen in 2 decades of coaching at the Division I level. And it was just thoroughly dominant. And it was a big reason why Texas Tech throttled BYU in both of those games. They want their defensive line to be at that level, and they have a lot of bodies there. A lot of those bodies are relatively young, freshmen, sophomores who still need time to develop in this system. But they believe that with the development they expect from these young players, they can get to that level. And if it comes to fruition that they do have that, yeah, that could be a real strong part of this defense, because I think outside of it, it's pretty dang strong across the board, but they do need that defensive line to take another step forward.
Linebacker, I'll let you talk about your guy here in a second, but what is it with BYU? They always have a guy at linebacker that is just really good.
Yeah, and so Isaiah Glasker is coming back for what will be his 5th year in the program, and he was a guy that before this past season, I thought he was going to be on his way to the NFL. Now, he got an ankle injury early on in the season against Colorado, and it really hampered him the rest of the way. He just never really got back to 100%. So he's banking on being fully healthy this year and punching his ticket to the NFL next year. So he's back. You also have Stiali Asera, who is their rock at middle linebacker. He is also back. So you've got 2 guys that are already right there, ready to rock and roll and have proven themselves at this level, speaking of the Big 12 and the Power 4 level, that I think are very nice. And we're going to talk about Cade Uluave in just a second, because I think that he's the missing piece, replacing Jack Kelly, who this is going to sound funny to you, Brian. BYU sacks have been coming kind of across the board from a lot of different players every single year. For the first time in Kalani Sitake's decade-long tenure as BYU's head coach, this past year he finally had a player get double-digit sacks. That was Jack Kelly. So he's not easy to replace, but they've got dudes at linebacker, and it's just kind of a tradition they've had. I don't know what it is. A lot of them come from the state of Utah. I mean, must grow them on trees here, I guess, for lack of a better term. There's a lot of talent, and it usually ends up at that linebacker spot, and more often than not, they're pretty dang good players.
Yeah, BYU's had linebackers for as long as I can remember, and it just nothing wrong with that. It's just like usually you have some gaps, but they haven't really had too many here lately. That's for darn sure. Go ahead and talk about your guy, the transfer from Cal. Statistically, I mean, he had almost 100 tackles. So is this going to be the best group in the Big 12 next year?
That's what they're hoping. And I expect it'll be among the tops, because I think Cade Uluave, he's a local product, played high school football here in the state of Utah. And then Cal, funny enough, Vic Soto, one of those stud BYU linebackers from yesteryear, was coaching at Cal and convinced him to go join the Bears. And over 3 seasons out there in the Bay Area, he's been nothing short of remarkable. He's been a really, really phenomenal player and had his best season to date this past year. And nearly 100 tackles. You and I were talking before this, his PFF pass rush grade is in the 90s. He looks like a tailor-made fit to step into that role that Jack Kelly is vacating as kind of the hybrid wheel/edge rusher linebacker role that BYU has in this defense. And if you can go from Jack Kelly to what I think Cade Uluave can truly be, yeah, with Isaiah Glasker and Stiali Asera, I think you got probably the best trio of linebackers in the conference.
That's going to be a big help, because there are a lot of teams in the Big 12 every year that can score. So linebackers like that certainly help. When we come back, I want to get a little bit of perspective from Mr. Jake Hatch on the portal class and where BYU is going to be overall next year with their additions. That's next right here on this crossover.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kalia Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. The WNBA has released its 2026 schedule, featuring a 44-game regular season beginning on Friday, May 8th. The league's historic 30th season includes expansion teams Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo, with opening weekend highlights such as Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever hosting Paige Beckers and the Dallas Wings, and a rematch of the 2025 finals between the Aces and the Mercury. In college hoops, South Carolina handed Vanderbilt its first loss of the season with a dominant 103-74 win. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts the same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment. Putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
All right, Jake, let's talk portal. This is a very unique situation. BYU, the last I saw, has 9 guys. Usually when you have 10 or fewer, you're pretty comfy with your roster.
Yeah.
Anything else, like there's no extra ads. This is where we're at. We're done. Is BYU done here?
There may be a body or two. I think they would like to bring in maybe a backup quarterback to kind of fill out that room, maybe a running back. But we're not talking about finding a player at this point, Brian, that's I would call an impact player. And you're right. They were very calculated and targeted in who they went after in the portal, because the best work you can do in this day and age of college football is retain your top guys. And essentially to a man, you can go down the list of the guys BYU that did not that had eligibility to remain. We're not going to the NFL, and BYU brought every one of them back. They brought back Bear Bachmeier, LJ Martin, the reigning Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. He's back for his senior season. We already talked about Isaiah Glasker. We talked about Ciale Sarah. You can go down the list. BYU retained every one of those guys. And then when it came to the portal, they didn't need to fill a ton of gaps. So they were pretty targeted in who they went after. And they feel very confident that they've got themselves a nice transfer portal haul, even though it's relatively small compared to the rest of college football.
I'm a big fan of retention over additions. So I'm sure that's part of it for Solani Kataki. I mean, he's, by the way, a great coach. I think he's done a tremendous job out there at Brigham Young. My question is there anybody, did they lose that one guy? Like, oh man, I wish we hadn't lost that guy early to the draft or to another team.
Maybe Jack Kelly, because and that's the thing about this. You kind of look at it and say, well, okay, he's a guy that you'd like to have back, but that's the thing about this is outside of that, you replaced him with Cade Uluave, and honestly, I don't think there is a single other player in terms of outgoing transfers that I look at and say what could have been, because they're good players and they're good kids by and large, because I got to know a lot of these guys doing what I do in media out here in Utah, but they were guys who were whether second or third string and looking for a bigger opportunity for themselves. And to my knowledge, if I recall correctly, only one of their outgoing transfers is staying at the Power 4 level. So they understand. And speaking of Kalani, he always wants players to have an opportunity to live out their dreams as college football players. And if it's not in Provo, Utah, he's going to do his best to make sure they land on their feet. He'll make phone calls in their behalf, etc., to find a landing spot for them. But I do think that BYU doesn't really have anybody that I say, yeah, that's the one that got away, because there just isn't any of those guys, because they did a really, really fine job, especially with guys like Jay Hill leaving for Michigan. Speaking of defensive coordinator, going with Kyle Whittingham, you would have thought that some players would have followed him, but not a single one of those guys outside of a linebacker who's got a family connection to Jay joined him in Ann Arbor.
What about Walker Lyons? I think that he was one of the better Big Ten tight ends last year, and they were a really good team offensively, obviously. Lincoln Riley knows how to design an offense. Is there high hopes for him, and is there much discussion about what he's got going on?
100%. He's projected to be their starting tight end this year. And Carson Ryan came in from Utah and UCLA last year and had his best season. And he said on the record to us in the media at the end of this past season, saying, I wish I would have landed in Provo a whole lot sooner, because he had a major impact. He made tight ends at BYU actually relevant in this offense. And that's what Walker Lyons is coming into. He's got 2 years of eligibility remaining. His younger brother, Ryder, who's a bona fide 4/5-star prospect, depending on where you look in the recruiting rankings, he's on a mission right now for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they got the family connection with that. But Walker's going to walk right in here, not to pardon the pun, and he's probably going to be your starting tight end. And he's got to be looking at what Carson Ryan accomplished last year and say, hey, I can take that to the next level. And if he does that, that makes BYU's offense that much more dangerous, because it was pretty darn elite with Carson Ryan a year ago.
Yeah, I think that the athleticism that Lyons will bring, like his brother's a really good player, and when he gets to BYU, I've seen him play multiple times. He's really good. But this is a tight end. I don't know why he doesn't get more attention. Maybe it's because he was at USC, McCollum, and I get it. But like that guy was really good, and he was one of the reasons they had a good season last year at SC. Anything else that you think that they should have done in the portal, regardless offense, defense, or maybe there just wasn't a player available at a price they thought was fair?
Yeah, so I understand that we have a guy like LJ Martin. He's the reigning Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. He's going to have, if he has 13, he's 1,347 yards away from being BYU's all-time leading rusher, Brian. So there is a very decent shot he's going to lead BYU as the best running back in program history this season, because he had 1,300 yards this past year. The only question mark I had is, could they find a backup who I use the term all the time on Locked On Cougars. The best ability is availability. And essentially every one of his backups has had injury concerns. And you need to have somebody that LJ, who has also had injury concerns because he got dinged up this past year and he's had off-season shoulder surgery to repair it. You need to have somebody who can step into that role, because when he was out, especially against Texas Tech, that offense was stuck in the mud, and they've got to be able to find some traction there. But I fear that, the price in terms of a running back that could match what you're looking for probably maybe wasn't out there for the Cougars. And a lot of running backs, you know this, when guys hit the portal, they're looking for an opportunity. They're not necessarily looking to be a backup to a guy who's going to be a pretty decent draft pick next year. They don't want to play second fiddle. So I do think that running back spot, let's say there is a body still out there they feel like is capable, maybe they bring him in, but that's the one spot I would still be looking at if it were me.
All right, that's a fair assessment, but I mean, to have him back, by the way, he's awesome.
No, and it's great to have him back. I did want to ask you a question, because I love what you do with the portal, because you kind of take it a holistic approach to just the overall transfer portal cycle. Give me a sense, because I know that you're based out on the East Coast and we're out here in the West, speaking of BYU, but you mentioned the fact it's a relatively small class that BYU brought in, but give me your sense as BYU's gone through the Big 12 here, Brian. What has kind of been your sense of where BYU stands and I guess the overall pantheon of Power 4 football right now?
I think they're in like tier 2. I mean, there's about 5 or 6 teams that the way they recruit high school, like the portal in high school recruiting with receiver is pretty similar.
Yeah.
But O-line, D-line in the portal have nothing in common with high school and the portal. The elite kids, O-line go to about 10 schools. I bet you can name them real quick. And so can everybody else on here. And that's the difference. D-line, it's the same deal. But BYU has closed the gap because it's an advantage, obviously. The Mormon missions, the kids come back, they're older. They read like you're getting 24 and 25-year linemen. That's never going to go out of style. And they're coached well. I think Satake is one of the top 10 to 15 coaches in the sport, maybe top 5, like depends. Like if he was at an elite program that fit him, I think he could win national titles. So they're on that cusp. But they have to prove in the trenches, which is ironic. This is a good segue. What we're going to talk about next. I think besides Tech and BYU, one of the problems that BYU and Tech have is they're playing against teams in the league that don't have the linemen. And then when they go out of conference, they're not used to it. So whether it's bowl game or into the playoffs. So that's a big thing. But like BYU's close. If they could just get that one, like a left tackle, and I know this is saying a lot, that's a top 15 pick. That's real easy, by the way, I'm sure. Imagine what they would be offensively. Like if you just had that anchor, that's the difference between Georgia, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas, some of those schools. They always have an offensive lineman as like a top 10 pick in the making. BYU, they got a bunch of guys, like maybe they just do it collectively this next year because that's what Indiana did. Indiana didn't have a top 10 pick. That's, by the way, one of the rarest teams in athletics I've ever seen. But that's got to be BYU's model for the short term until they develop one of those guys. So I hope that answers your question. They're on that next rung, and a lot of people probably don't count them, but name a team that executes better with what they have than BYU, because they don't have the same roster that Georgia or Miami do, but they win a lot of games because they execute. So I think they're tier 2. So when we come back, we're going to talk more about this, and we're going to talk about Tech, BYU, who's in that group with them at the top this next year. That is next here on this crossover, the portal and Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Rocket Money. Let's be real. Managing your finances can be overwhelming. You have subscriptions you forget about, bills that keep piling up, and trying to figure out where all your money goes each month. It's a hassle, and you can feel like you're losing control. And who has time to track every transaction that you go through with all those possible hidden fees? That's where Rocket Money comes into play, the personal financial app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. If you're not sure about something that's happening with your finances, good chance it's not good. I know that I've had unwanted subscriptions, and you probably have too, and it gives you a better barometer. Rocket Money is going to show you where you're spending and how you can change it to save money to put it in your pocket. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join rocketmoney.com/locked-on, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Say it with me, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. All right, Jake, Here's the point where the rubber meets the road. The Big 12 gets beat on, and nobody beats on the Big 12 more than me. I'm that guy, straight up. There's no ifs, no ands, no buts. But it's not BYU and Tech.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about. It's the teams they play, because I don't think it prepares them, and I think it hurts them in their playoff. Like you talked about preseason top 25, it makes it harder because who did you beat? Like Tech's schedule next year, Tech and BYU don't play next season, do they? Is regular season? That's no good, brother. That's no good at all. I know it's just the way it fell, but anyway, the point is still the same. They don't get a lot of respect. I think it's because of the trenches. Again, as we talked about in the last segment, BYU's close. They're the next team to make it into that group, definitively. There's nobody close to them, in my opinion, in the Big 12 to number 2. I guess you could maybe say ASU because they were in the playoff 2 years ago, but that was a really unique year. I think that they need somebody else to step up to help them. Like they need another game, especially since they don't play each other this year. Can anybody else, especially in the trenches, compete with Tech or BYU that you see in 2026 from the conference?
So the team I'm thinking of is, because they did it this past year, is Utah, BYU's arch rival, because they got 2 top 15 picks at tackle, and their other 3 offensive linemen are all NFL caliber guys. But all those guys are leaving, Brian. So, and with the turnover with Kyle Whittingham leaving, him taking half of that staff, most of the offensive staff in particular. My question mark is how quickly Morgan Scalley can get Utah back to that level. I'm not saying they couldn't do it this year. I just need to see it. I think Utah is right there in the mix if they do have those dudes. I just need to see it. And that's so long as they have those bodies, I think Utah is in that mix. The other team that I am intrigued by with regards to this are the Arizona Wildcats. And the reason I say that is because Arizona, remember, Brent Brennan was on the hot seat going into the season, and it was like, okay, it's just a matter of time before he sent his walking papers. But they responded with a big time season. And when BYU and Arizona played their game down in Tucson, I know it was marred by a weather delay. They played a double overtime thriller, and BYU got the win. But I was really impressed in particular with what offensive line wise Arizona boasted in that game. We talked about Indiana and how they kind of do it as a collective. I think it's kind of the same way BYU and Arizona are doing it, where they maybe don't have, you mentioned that top 25 first round offensive lineman, but they've got like maybe a 4th round lineman, a 5th round, and a 6th round, and you kind of fill in the gaps that way, and the collective whole makes up for that. I was really impressed with Arizona. The question is, does Arizona keep that going here? So yeah, the two programs I'll be monitoring are Arizona and Utah, because of just what I've seen from them over the past 12 to 24 months.
It was surprising to me, to your point about Arizona. I thought, they're about to fall off a cliff or get cratered, whatever phrase you want to use. I watched them a few times.
Yeah,
they were pretty impressed. That quarterback's fun to watch too. He just makes plays. He would not be much
dude. Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah, he's not much fun to try to scheme against, but can they do it? It's different when you're the hunter,
correct?
And now you're the hunter. What did they win? Like 9 games or something like that. They're going to get circled this year, so I think that's what makes college football fascinating. Year to year, we can sit here and predict, and we do it all off season. We've already started. It's January, but one of these teams that we're going to take for granted in the Big 12 is going to go 8-4 or better, guaranteed. Yeah. Happens every year, and it's super annoying. But the only team I feel good about their projection, and unfortunately for them it's bad, is Iowa State, because they got all their good players robbed from them. They're not going to have a good season. Everything else amongst those other teams, not BYU or Texas Tech, I'm iffy on. So let me ask you about Arizona State. They went out and they lost Levitt to LSU. Kiffin stole him. But their receiver room now is pretty impressive. You've got Kansas State. They still have the same quarter. Like, they lost some players. They're always well coached. They stole the OC from, he's a K-State guy from Texas A&M, goes back home. Anybody else that you think could make noise that maybe somebody's not too sure about, or just not knowledgeable about in the Big 12?
I do think it's Arizona State, because I think that what Kenny Dillingham's doing there is, they obviously them making the playoff 2 years ago was absolutely incredible. They went literally from worst to first. The preseason poll, they were picked 16th, and they finished first and went to the playoff. That was absolutely remarkable. And they backslid last year. Now, a lot of it went with regards to the health of Levitt, obviously, and the situation involving him. But they bring in a guy in Cutter Boley from Kentucky, who is an all-SEC freshman. They really think that he's the real deal. And if he is, Arizona State's going to be frisky. I'm not necessarily going to think that they're probably 10-win caliber at this point. They could end up that because you point out the Big 12 has this way of getting a team that goes from Arizona. They go from like 3 wins to 9 wins. I can see Arizona State bouncing back and winning 8 or 9 games very easily. And it's because of just the talent accumulation, and that it goes more to the skill talent that Kenny Dillingham's accumulated. My question about them is still in the trenches, speaking of ASU. But yeah, that's a good one there. Colin Klein taking over at Kansas State. The cupboards aren't bare there in Manhattan. And that's the thing about this is Colin Klein's coming in as an alum. He's going to have that pride, obviously, to get the Wildcats back to where they need to be. Having Avery Thompson, no matter how inconsistent he is a multi-year starter at quarterback, and that's a good building block to have. I am interested in Kansas State. The one other team I do want to throw in the mix in terms of just one I'm monitoring is Rich Rod and West Virginia. Even though he played, I think 4, 5, 6 quarterbacks this past year, they had offense. They had offense all year long, and that just shows that Rich Rod does. He's an offensive wizard just in terms of his ability to coordinate top-tier offense. If West Virginia can get some semblance of a defense, they could be a team that's interesting as well in terms of the team that could really kind of bump up this year. We'll see.
I want to throw out one thing, and it's just because I'm curious. I got to know him a little bit in the recruiting process. DJ Lagway.
Yeah.
I have no idea how Dave Aranda is a defensive coach and they're better on offense than defense. I don't understand that. That's part of you guys' league. I'll let you explain that. It makes no sense. But if Lagway is at least decent, could they make noise? Do they have enough roster pieces, or am I just out of my mind?
I do think that having a strong quarterback in the Big 12 does give you a leg up. And if Lagway is what a lot of people have thought he's been for years, even going back to his recruiting days, because I love what you do in terms of you cover recruiting from all angles. If he is as good as he could be and what people still think he could be, yeah, that's going to give Baylor an opportunity to be interesting. But I just don't know defensively. And you're right. It's kind of funny. Dave Aranda is considered one of the premier defensive minds in the sport. And I can say that knowing people that he's worked here in the state of Utah at points in his career, and people rave about his defensive chops, but their defense, it's not good. And I just don't know that they have the dudes to have a competent defense. The offense, yeah, if Lagway is good, they're going to be able to play some high scoring games, but that's just, it's not going to lend itself. You talked about this, the Big 12, maybe we beat up on each other in this league, but once you get outside the league, does it hold up? And that's my question mark about Baylor.
I'm kind of there too. And that kind of leads me into the final point and the bigger point of this part of the show. I'm good with Baylor and some of those teams being competitive, but I don't think they're on BYU's level. Certainly not on Tech's level. For those that haven't looked, go look at Tech's portal D-line class.
Yeah.
It's insanity. Yeah. Like there's money being spent, and then there's that. If I remember right, they got 7 guys. Mm-hmm. Like for the love of mankind, it's really hard to understand. But anyway, is there anybody that you think besides those 2 that could win a playoff game, barring something really and there's always the shocker. I get it. Yeah. Anybody else that's capable or no?
Right now, no. I do think Tech and BYU are the best bets to make to make the college football playoff and obviously advance, because that's the next step the Big 12's got to take here, Brian. They've had 2 chances in this expanded playoff. They've had 2 teams in it, and both of them have lost. And Tech got absolutely dominated by Oregon, and that was disheartening to watch, because I really do think that Tech was much better than they showed in that game, because I watched them up close twice. Speaking of BYU and Tech playing head-to-head. But I at this juncture, I don't think there is another team out there that, let's say they were to make the playoff, that I think has the capability of advancing. But I do think that BYU and Tech, if they do make the playoff field, depending on how the matchup goes, I think they are capable of winning and advancing.
I would agree. I'm curious, Bear Bachmeier, how much more does he throw against top teams? Do they change the offense? Like little things like that. Well, but go ahead.
On that point, just real quick. A lot of people think that Bear is wholly reliant on his legs kind of generating the offense, but I want people, if you want to see what he's capable of with his arm talent, Brian, go back and watch the Pop-Tarts Bowl against Georgia Tech. He had a bad wheel in that game. He got dinged up early on in that game. It was a holdover from the Big 12 title game where he was clearly hampered. but watch what he did with his arm in that Pop-Tarts Bowl. That's the arm talent that I have heard about Bear Bachmeier that came, I think, finally to bear. He put together a 3,500-yard season as a true freshman who enrolled at BYU 5 weeks before fall camp started. It's remarkable what he produced as a freshman, and I think the sky is the limit for this young man. I'm really, really high on his potential.
That's why I'm curious to see what those receivers do, because he's going to take a jump. Freshman to sophomore, I mean, that's just the traditional way it goes. If that passing game goes up, obviously the running game will be very good. They can compete with anybody. So I'm sure that this season will be interesting. By the way, the Notre Dame game might have the most high-level ticket allotment for a road team. It's Notre Dame travels. That'll be a very interesting game for you guys, but good luck with that. Jake, tell everybody where they can find your work, my friend.
Yeah, BYU-centric content every single day, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, also available on YouTube. Please subscribe, rate, and review just like you do with the portal, Locked on the Portal. We're also on social media, Locked on Cougars on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And if you want to follow my individual work, Jacob C. Hatch on all of those platforms.
You can find the Portal Podcast all the same places you can find Locked on Cougars. This has been a crossover. Everybody have a good one.